The milk jug sits on my kitchen table, empty except for a folded note. $7 million worth of prime Wisconsin dairy land, 3 generations of my family's blood and sweat, reduced to this plastic container with my sister's handwriting inside. Thanks for the cash, Big Brother. I stare at it every morning with my coffee, a reminder of the worst mistake of my life. I never thought Ellen would do this to me. When I signed over the deed 2 years ago, I believed I was securing our family legacy. My sister had always loved the farm more than I did, always talked about modernizing it, making it sustainable. The future of the Hendersons, she'd say. I had no children of my own, and at 71, I was ready to step back, find some peace in my final years. What I didn't know was that Ellen had already been talking to developers. Prime lakefront property just 3 hours from Chicago? They'd been circling for years. Within 6 months of the transfer, the bulldozers arrived. Now there's a luxury condo complex where our red barn stood for 102 years. And all I got was this empty milk jug, hand-delivered with a smile before she moved to Florida. Growing up on Henderson Dairy was like living inside a Norman Rockwell painting with calluses. My father, Walter Henderson, was a third-generation dairy farmer whose entire identity was wrapped up in those 300 acres of rolling Wisconsin hills. A man of few words but unmistakable presence. He'd wake at 4:30 every morning, work until sunset, and expect the same from his children. Mother died when I was 11, leaving Dad to raise 3 kids alone. I was the oldest, then Ellen, 2 years younger, and Jimmy, the baby, who we lost to Vietnam in '71. Dad never quite recovered from that, but the farm kept him going. It was the constant, the anchor, the thing that made sense when nothing else did. As the eldest son, the expectation was clear. The farm would be mine someday. But I was never a natural farmer. I'd rather read books about far-off places than fix fences or milk cows. Ellen, no, she was born for it. She could drive a tractor by age 10, knew every cow by name, and understood the business side better than Dad by the time she was 16. James reads too much to be a real farmer, Dad would say, not maliciously but matter-of-factly, as if stating that the sky was blue. Ellen's got the touch, though. Shame she wasn't born a boy. The summer I turned 14, we hosted the County Dairy Association's annual picnic. Dad had been elected president that year, a big honor in our community. He'd spent weeks preparing, painting the barn, clearing the pastures. That morning, I was supposed to move the heifers to the back field before guests arrived. I got distracted reading Steinbeck in the hayloft and completely forgot. When the first cars pulled up, 20 young heifers were still grazing in the front pasture, right where the picnic tables were supposed to go. Dad's face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. "This is what happens when you've got your head in the clouds instead of on your work," he announced to the assembled farmers. "Ellen, show your brother how it's done." She rounded up those heifers in 10 minutes flat while I stood there, the object of amused pity from every dairy family in 3 counties. That pattern continued through high school. I'd disappoint, Ellen would excel. I went to the state university to study business, the compromise Dad and I reached. "At least learn something useful," he said. "Farms need managers, too." I did well there, away from the constant comparisons, building a life in Madison. When Dad had his first heart attack in 1992, I came home to help run things. It was supposed to be temporary, just until he recovered. But he never fully did, and somehow 20 years passed. I modernized our operations, expanded our production, and brought us into computerized record-keeping. The farm thrived financially under my management, even as Dad grumbled that I was turning farming into accounting. Ellen, meanwhile, had married Tom Larson from the neighboring farm, had 2 kids, and helped run their operation. Our relationship remained cordial but distant. She'd stop by Sundays to check on Dad, and we'd exchange pleasantries about weather and milk prices, carefully avoiding deeper waters. When Dad died in 2018 at 95, the farm was valued at just over $7 million, a testament to both his stubborn perseverance and my business acumen. His will left everything to me, with a note saying simply, "Take care of the land. It's the only thing that lasts." Ellen attended the reading with a tight smile and congratulated me politely. I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes, disappointment perhaps, or resignation, but she said nothing. 2 months after the funeral, her husband Tom died suddenly of a stroke. That's when everything changed. Ellen showed up at my door on a Tuesday morning in April 2019, 3 months after Tom's funeral. She looked thinner, hair streaked with more gray than I remembered, but her eyes had that same determined glint they'd had since childhood. "I need to talk to you about something, James," she said, accepting the coffee I offered but ignoring the Danish. "Tom left me with some debts. The farm's underwater and the kids' college funds are gone." I'd heard rumors about Tom's gambling problems but had never asked. Some topics remained off limits between us. "I'm sorry," I said, meaning it. "How can I help?" She set down her cup carefully. "I want to come home, to Henderson Dairy." The request blindsided me. After 40 years of separate lives, she wanted to return? I stammered something about needing to think it over. "There's nothing to think about," she said, leaning forward. "You're alone here. I know farming better than you ever did. My kids are grown. It makes sense, James." "I've managed fine for decades," I said, defensiveness creeping into my voice. "The farm's doing well." Ellen laughed, not unkindly, but with the weary patience of someone explaining something obvious. "You've kept it afloat with your business degree, sure, but when's the last time you walked the south pasture? Do you even know that the irrigation system is failing? Or that the Miller property next door is for sale, the perfect expansion opportunity?" She was right, of course. I'd become increasingly detached from the day-to-day operations, relying on hired managers while I handled finances from my office. At 67, my knees protested at the mere thought of climbing into the tractor cab. Over the next 6 months, Ellen gradually moved back into the farmhouse, into her old bedroom, as if she'd never left. She took over more responsibilities while I retreated further into administrative tasks. The dynamic felt familiar, like slipping back into childhood roles, except now I held the title deed. One evening in November, we sat at the kitchen table reviewing quarterly numbers. The farm was having its best year in a decade, largely due to Ellen's hands-on management and connections in the local dairy industry. "We should talk about the future," she said, closing the ledger. "I'm not getting any younger, and neither are you." "What did you have in mind?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "Transfer the farm to me," she said simply. "You keep the house and a generous stipend. I'll handle everything else." When I hesitated, her eyes narrowed. "Don't tell me you're planning to sell to strangers when you're gone. This is Henderson land. It should stay with Hendersons." "I haven't decided anything," I said, though the thought had crossed my mind. Corporate buyers had been making increasingly attractive offers. "Dad would roll in his grave if this land went to developers," she said, playing the card she knew would land hardest. The conversation escalated. Old resentment surfaced. Her bitterness at being overlooked in Dad's will, despite being the real farmer. My lingering hurt over years of being compared unfavorably. We said things we'd both held back for decades. "You were always his favorite," I finally shouted. "Every day of my childhood, I heard how Ellen would have done it better." She went very still. "And yet, he left everything to you. The son, the tradition, the expectation." Her voice turned cold. "Do you know what he told me the week before he died? that he was proud of how you'd grown into the role, despite not having the touch. That maybe books weren't such a waste of time after all. The revelation staggered me. Dad had never said anything similar to my face. In the weeks that followed, tension thickened between us. Ellen grew more insistent about the transfer, bringing it up at every opportunity. She introduced me to her son Michael, who'd recently graduated with a degree in agricultural science and was eager to join the family business. The next generation, she called him with pointed emphasis. Meanwhile, I began experiencing chest pains. Nothing serious, the doctor assured me, just stress and age, but it forced me to confront my mortality. Who would care for the land when I was gone? The farm had always been too much responsibility, a yoke I'd carried out of duty rather than passion. On Christmas Eve, Ellen invited her children and grandchildren to the farmhouse, the first family holiday gathering since Dad's passing. Watching her 4-year-old granddaughter chase the barn cats, I felt something shift inside me. This was what the farm needed: new life, continuation, purpose. The next morning, I handed Ellen an envelope containing transfer paperwork already signed. "Merry Christmas," I said. "It's yours now. All I ask is that you keep the Henderson name and let me stay in the house until I'm gone." She hugged me tightly, tears in her eyes. "You won't regret this, James. I promise. This farm will stay in our family forever." I believed her. I had to. What else was left? 6 months after I signed over the farm, I noticed surveyors on the south field. When I asked Ellen about it, she brushed me off with vague comments about assessing irrigation needs. A week later, men in suits arrived, walking the property with Ellen, pointing at buildings, making notes. Again, her explanation was evasive, something about insurance requirements. The truth came in the mail: a county zoning notice for a public hearing regarding the proposed luxury residential development of the former Henderson dairy property. My hands trembled as I read the developer's name: Lakeshore Vista Properties. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I confronted Ellen that evening as she returned from a business dinner in Madison. "You're selling the farm?" My voice cracked on the last word. She didn't even flinch. "I'm capitalizing on an investment. The dairy industry is dying, James. This property is worth 3 times as much to developers." "You promised to keep it in the family," I said, feeling foolish even as the words left my mouth. "For generations." Ellen laughed, not the warm chuckle I remembered from our youth, but something harder, almost metallic. "Promises are for children and fools. Dad taught me that the hard way." "What about Michael, your grandchildren? The Henderson legacy?" "Michael has a job lined up with an agribusiness firm in California. My grandchildren will have trust funds instead of calluses. That's a better legacy than milk and manure." I attended the zoning hearing alone. The community center was packed with neighbors, many whose families had farmed alongside Henderson's for generations. Ellen sat at the front with the developers, wearing a suit I'd never seen before. When the floor opened for public comments, I rose shakily to my feet. The room quieted. Everyone knew who I was, the elder Henderson who'd given away his birthright. "My name is James Henderson," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "For 101 years, my family has worked this land. We've weathered dust bowls and depressions, blizzards and bankruptcies. We've supplied milk to this county through world wars and recessions." Ellen watched impassively, fingers tapping on the table. "I gave this farm to my sister because I believed she loved it as our father did, as I do in my own way." I paused, searching for words that wouldn't come. I was wrong. The whisper started then, rippling through the room. I raised my voice over them. "What you all don't know, what I never told anyone, is that this farm should have been Ellen's all along." The room went silent again. Our father changed his will the night before he died. He was going to leave the farm to Ellen, not me." I pulled out a yellowed envelope from my jacket pocket. "This is the draft he signed. His lawyer was coming the next morning to finalize it. Dad died before dawn." Ellen's face had gone pale. This was the secret I'd kept for 20 years, the knowledge that had eaten away at me as I ran a farm that should never have been mine. I kept the farm because I thought it was what Dad wanted. I convinced myself I was honoring his memory. But the truth is, I was afraid of losing the only thing that gave my life meaning. My voice broke then, even though I never really wanted it. I turned to face Ellen directly. "You were always the true farmer in this family. Dad knew it. I knew it. Everyone here knew it. And now you're destroying everything we built." Ellen stood up, her expression unreadable. "You're lying. Dad would never." "Ask Morton Lewis," I said, naming Dad's attorney who'd retired to Florida years ago. "He drafted the document. I found it when I was clearing Dad's desk." The room erupted in murmurs. Ellen walked quickly toward me, but instead of confronting me, she grabbed the envelope from my hand and strode out of the building without another word. The zoning board, unsettled by the family drama, tabled the decision pending further community input. I shuffled out amid sympathetic and curious glances, feeling hollow but somehow lighter. The secret was out. The pretense was over. 3 days later, I received an eviction notice. I had 30 days to vacate the farmhouse. I moved into a small apartment in town, taking only my books, clothes, and a few photographs. The farmhouse had never truly felt like mine anyway. It had always been Dad's house, then a museum to his memory. My new place overlooked the town square with its Civil War monument and Wednesday farmers market, a different kind of peace. Word spread quickly through our small community. Neighbors I barely knew stopped by with casseroles and offers of help. My phone rang with calls from cousins and second cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Even my high school English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, now in her 90s, sent a handwritten note saying she'd always known I had the courage of Atticus Finch inside me. The most surprising visitor was Michael, Ellen's son. He appeared at my door one evening in early autumn, looking uncomfortable in pressed jeans and a button-down shirt. "Uncle James," he said formally, "I need to apologize." I invited him in, offered coffee, which he declined. "I didn't know about the development plans until they were finalized," he said, perching on the edge of my sofa. "Mom told me you were selling the house to retire to Arizona." The lie shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. "I've never been to Arizona," I said. "Too hot." Michael smiled faintly. "That's what I thought." He hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Dad didn't leave us in debt. The farm was doing fine." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "But Ellen said—" "Mom's been planning this for years," Michael continued, "since before Dad died. She had meetings with developers as far back as 2016. I found the emails." "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because I quit the job in California." His posture straightened with resolve. "I've been talking to the Petersons about leasing their dairy operation. It's smaller than Henderson's was, but it's a start." A week later, the local paper ran a front-page story exposing the developer's history of environmental violations and broken promises to other communities. The reporter had received an anonymous package of documents, though when she described the manila envelope with its distinctive red string tie, I recognized my father's stationery. Someone had done their research. Public opinion turned sharply against the development. The county commissioners, facing re-election, voted unanimously against the zoning change. Lakeshore Vista Properties withdrew their application. Ellen didn't take it well. According to town gossip, she'd already purchased a beachfront condo in Naples with her expected proceeds. Now she was stuck with a dairy farm she couldn't develop and didn't want to run. In December, exactly 1 year after I'd signed over the farm, I received a formal letter from Ellen's attorney offering to sell Henderson Dairy back to me at market value, $7.2 million, money I didn't have. I called Michael. "I have a proposition," I said, "a partnership. My business experience, your agricultural knowledge." He was silent for a long moment. "Mom would never agree to work with you." "Not with Ellen," I clarified. "With you." 2 days later, we met at the diner on Main Street. Michael brought his wife, Sarah, a veterinarian I'd only met at family funerals. They had a counteroffer. They would buy the farm from Ellen using a loan secured against future earnings. I would serve as business manager and silent partner, with a 25% stake. "We can't offer much salary at first," Sarah explained, "but you'd have lifetime rights to the old caretaker's cottage on the north edge of the property." The cottage, a stone building my grandfather had built for his parents, had been my favorite retreat as a child. It needed work, but had the best view of the sunset over the western fields. "Why would you want me involved at all?" I asked, "after everything that's happened?" Michael and Sarah exchanged glances. "Because you're the only one who loved the farm for what it is, not what it could be sold for," he said simply. We drew up the papers that week. Ellen, eager to be free of her suddenly illiquid asset, accepted their offer, without ever knowing of my involvement. She was on a plane to Florida within days of the closing. The renovation of the cottage became my pandemic project. I installed bookshelves along every wall, finally unpacking volumes that had been in storage for decades. The large west-facing window became my new reading nook, where I could watch the seasons change across fields that had nourished my family for generations. Michael and Sarah modernized the dairy operation, transitioning to organic practices and adding a creamery to produce artisanal cheeses. They named their signature product Henderson Reserve, aged in the same stone cellar where my grandfather had stored wheels during the Depression. One morning in early spring 2021, a package arrived at my cottage. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. Inside was an empty plastic milk jug, our brand, with the distinctive Henderson logo my father had designed in the 1960s. Inside the jug was a folded note. "Thanks for the cash, big brother. Enjoy the view." It was Ellen's final jab, a reminder that she'd ultimately profited from the farm she claimed to love, while I was left with just a cottage and memories. I placed the jug on my kitchen table, where the morning sun would catch it. Not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a symbol of something else, that even empty vessels can be refilled. That summer, Michael and Sarah's daughter, my grandniece Lucy, began spending afternoons with me while her parents worked. At 4, she was curious about everything, especially the books that lined my walls. We established a ritual, one story before lunch, another before she returned to the farmhouse. "Why do you have that old milk jug, Uncle James?" she asked one day. I considered how to answer. "To remind me that things aren't always what they seem," I said finally. She frowned, dissatisfied. "It should have milk in it." The next day she proudly presented me with the same jug, now filled with wildflowers from the meadow behind the cottage. "Better," she declared, "not empty anymore." Indeed, as I sit here in my cottage window at 73, watching Michael's oldest boy drive the tractor across fields that have sustained Hendersons for 5 generations, I realize something profound. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what continues to grow in your absence. Ellen got her money, but I got something far more valuable. Not ownership, but belonging. Not control, but connection. The farm continues, not as a possession to be defended, but as a living entity passing through our hands. That empty milk jug still sits on my table, now filled with seasonal wildflowers that Lucy faithfully replaces each week. It's become our tradition, a reminder that the containers of our lives matter far less than what we choose to fill them with. If my story resonates with you, please consider subscribing to this channel for more real-life family dramas and the unexpected lessons they teach us. And remember, sometimes what appears to be our greatest loss can lead to our most meaningful gain.
The land endures, the story continues, and in the end, that's all that really matters.